Well, the former president has already been on stage in North Carolina, where he's been claiming his opponent would open the borders the day after the election. And Vice President Kamala Harris is due to make 4 appearances tonight in the crucial state of Pennsylvania, with some big celebrity names due to feature as well. Also tonight, the government announces tuition fees are going up in England for the first time in 8 years. I've sat down with the Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson, who's been telling me if she hadn't, places would have been scrapped and courses would have been too. Also developing tonight, Priti Patel and Mel Stride had been given jobs in Kemi Badenoch's new shadow cabinet. We'll have the latest on who else could be in her top team. And as we look ahead to tomorrow's crucial poll in the United States, we'll be looking back at the big election moments from years gone by. All that and more with Liam Fox and John McDonnell, who will be with us for the next hour. It's Monday, I'm Sophy Ridge, live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, welcome to the Politics Hub. Well, the world awaits Kamala Harris or Donald Trump. We're going to be dipping into the final push of campaigning on tonight's programme. But whoever wins, there is one thing that's been increasingly playing on my mind as the contest has developed: the Americanization of British politics. You know, the race between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris is just so polarised. You know, 2 people, 2 groups of supporters, so certain they're right and the other side is wrong, disagreeing so fundamentally on so many things. And the tone of the debate as well, you know, the violence of the language, the 2 tribes on social media becoming ever more entrenched. And, you know, it feels like it is happening here as well. And that, of course, is reflected in the media too. America has long had opinionated news outlets. There's no Ofcom requiring impartiality in TV media, and big brand media personalities espousing their own views. And you can see the trend towards that in the United Kingdom as well, you know, with more partisan outlets, more media influencers. You know, that's not necessarily a bad thing. You know, everyone has their bias. Maybe it's good if people are open about it. But it does change the tone of the debate. And it does mean that as a news consumer, you know, if you prefer to have your own views amplified rather than challenged, well, that is a bit easier. And I guess, you know, the final part of the Americanization of our politics comes in our politicians themselves. You know, Kemi Badenoch is the new leader of the opposition. It strikes me she's quite American in the way she does politics. She's about ideology rather than policy, you know, principle rather than detail. She ran her leadership campaign that way, in a very sort of presidential style. We'll be hearing more about her first steps and her first shadow cabinet on the programme as well. But of course, we're going to start with an update on that all-important race for the White House, because as the clock ticks down, both candidates have been making a frantic final push for votes. Donald Trump's already made an appearance in North Carolina, where he's been hammering home his message on immigration and also trying to push up turnout.
Here's my only purpose in even being here today: get out and vote. You know that. I'm thrilled to be back in this beautiful state with thousands of proud, hardworking American patriots. That's what you are. You're patriots. You built this country.
Well, our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn, is in Philadelphia for us tonight. Dominic, talk to me about where the race is at, because I'll be honest with you, I feel like, you know, one minute I'm hearing someone tell me that Kamala Harris is in front, the next minute is Donald Trump, the next minute is neck and neck. What is going on?
Well, it is so close. Anyone you talk to, they say the same thing, which is one day they think Trump's going to win, the other day they think Kamala's going to win, and it's really impossible to predict. I mean, we could wake up whenever the result is decided, and that could be days or possibly weeks away, with Trump winning and sort of working out, well, of course, that was going to happen. The economy, although it's improving, wasn't improving enough. So many people we've spoken to have said they just don't feel it, and the affordability issue is enormous here. So we could say it was the economy stupid, and that's why Trump won. Or equally, we could wake up and find that Kamala has won because Trump was so divisive. His election to lose, but he's worked very hard to lose it, many would say. So it's very hard to predict, particularly where we are here in Pennsylvania. And what I think we're seeing here is a major difference. I mean, you talked about in your intro how British politics are becoming more Americanized. One thing they have in common is that people here have had enough of this election, as I think British people have had, or certainly had enough of elections, because we had so many. One woman said to us the other day, she said, we can't take it anymore. And I think people really have, they're just dying for this to be over. But the fundamental difference, I think, which remains is the amount of money in American politics, which is just getting bigger and bigger. $16 billion being spent on campaigning in this election, and all those restrictions that were imposed on America, the use of money in American politics in the wake of the Watergate scandal, were basically ripped up 14 years ago in a number of Supreme Court hearings and challenges, and there is just a huge amount of money washing through the system, which its critics say is making the election and politics here more and more corrupt, or certainly individuals are more and more invested in it and able to use their money to try and influence the outcome. Elon Musk, the world's richest man, Donald Trump's ally in particular, now he is fighting a state of Pennsylvania attempt to challenge and scrap what they regard, the state regards, as an illegal lottery scheme that he is running, where he effectively is giving $1 million to any voter who wins each day a lottery. All they have to do is sign up to a petition confirming their support for gun rights and freedom of speech, and if they're lucky, their hat gets taken out of their name gets taken out of the hat, and they're $1 million richer at the end of the day. Well, the state of Pennsylvania is trying to challenge that and to bring it to an end the day before the election. But more crucially, I think, is the amount of money that Elon Musk is putting into the Get Out the Vote campaign. He's put $120 million of his own money, and a number of other very rich Americans are doing the same. And effectively, the Trump campaign is outsourcing that Get Out the Vote efforts to Musk and his super PAC, that's his campaign group, not just in Pennsylvania, but in all the other, all 7 swing states. And getting out the vote will be crucial to both sides because it is so close, and no more so than in Pennsylvania and Michigan, where the race, according to the opinion polls, is neck and neck. So literally every last vote will count in the countdown to the final results, or the end of polling at least, tomorrow night.
It's absolutely fascinating race, and as you say, in Pennsylvania, where you are, and of course where both candidates are this evening, really close as well. So it's obviously going to come down to a couple of states, but what are the kind of particular voter groups that could swing this election? Is there anyone in particular that people are really targeting when they're trying to get that vote out?
Yeah, there are all kinds of demographics that both campaigns are going after and have been more successful than the other at doing so. Donald Trump appears to have done better amongst non-college educated males, and he's done particularly well, and unexpectedly so, I think, in the minds of many, with African-American black men and with Hispanic voters. And I think that surprised some people, but Hispanic voters do seem to be as aspirational, many of them, as Donald Trump. They do see America in the positive light that he likes to paint it in, as a great place that has lost its way. And they would say, or those Hispanic voters that we've spoken to feel that the Democrats have been too negative about America. For whatever reason, they do seem to be, many of them, supporting Trump more than had been expected, more than we've seen before, I think, for any Republican candidates. That's certainly what the polls are suggesting. On the other side, Kamala Harris seems to be doing particularly well amongst women, and that, I think, is particularly to do with the abortion issue. Against that, a lot of women we've spoken to have found that life is getting and remains too expensive. A lot of complaints from them about just the cost of produce, the cost of groceries, the cost of gas. And I think Americans do feel they have a kind of God-given right to cheap produce, cheap food and cheap gas. And even though the economic statistics are showing that America's moving very much in the right direction economically, recovering from the pandemic better than nearly other Western economy, people are just not feeling it. They don't feel it in their pocket. It is, I think, in the words of James Carville, Bill Clinton's advisor back in the 90s, it is the economy, stupid. And even though the economy is improving, it's not doing well enough, I think, in the minds of many voters. And that does seem to be helping Donald Trump. In a sense, he should be really running away with this because of that, because the economy is always such a fundamental issue in American politics. But it is neck and neck, and that, I think, is partly because Kamala Harris has run a pretty effective campaign from a very standing start, but also because Donald Trump is such a divisive figure.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Dominic Waghorn there in Pennsylvania for us. And we'll have live coverage of the US election right here on Sky News. That will be tomorrow, Tuesday, the 5th of November. throughout the day and the night with our top team there out in the States. And of course, the election is sure to feature in tomorrow's newspapers. We'll have our extended press preview from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be Brian Class, a political scientist at University College London, and The Spectator's economics editor, Kate Andrews. Well, while the eyes of the world are on the US, the government has today announced a pretty significant change to student fees in England. Tuition fees have been frozen at £9,250 since 2017, but from next year they're going to rise to £9,535. That's an increase of £285 per academic year. Well, it was also announced that maintenance loans will increase in line with inflation, up by £404 in 2025-26 per year in 2025-26. Here's the Education Secretary in the House of Commons a little earlier.
Increasing the fee cap has not been an easy decision, but I want to be crystal clear that this will not cost graduates more each month as they start to repay their loans. Universities are responsible for managing their own finances and must act to remain sustainable. But members across the House will agree that it is no use keeping tuition fees down for future students if the universities are not there for them to attend.
All right, let's bring in our political correspondent Tamara Cohen, shall we? And Tamara, was this a surprise?
It was a surprise in the sense that Labour certainly didn't tell us anything about this before the election. In fact, it was only 4 years ago that they were talking about abolishing student fees altogether. And although they didn't go into the election promising that, all the noises from Bridget Phillipson, even last summer, were about cutting the repayments. She said the system of university funding was broken, people were paying too much. But it's been clear for many months now that universities are suffering financial difficulties. 40% of them are going into the red, and that's because when fees were frozen at this current level, they've barely gone up since 2012 when they were first trebled, but they were frozen at £9,250. And of course, every year inflation goes up and their finances are put under strain. So something had to give, but this certainly wasn't trailed in advance. She's gone for a very modest rise, £285 next year, but I think it's very clear that there is more to come because this isn't going to help universities in a big way, and she's keen to say that students won't be repaying any more per month. Now, I'll come to what's coming later, but this is what students at Leeds University told us today about what they think about it.
Energy's gone up, food's gone up, cost of living, everything's more expensive. So I think it really is a bit of a barrier, especially now that tuition fees have gone up as well. And it's just going to take longer to pay them back into the future.
I don't have a lot of contact hours anyway for what I'm paying. I already think it's a lot. I'm not sure I get the most out of it.
I mean, I think feels like they're abandoning the youth a little bit. I feel like probably considering the fact that a lot of young people would have voted for Labour. I don't know, it just doesn't feel very fair, in my opinion.
Well, they sound pretty disappointed. Now, of course, students get a loan to cover their fees, which they have to then repay when their pay reaches a certain threshold. She hasn't announced anything about how that might change, something she criticised before. But she said in a few months' time, there will be more announcements. She talked a lot about universities, our universities being world-leading, wanting to make sure that they're doing the best for students, attracting the most disadvantaged students. But I think what we're going to clearly hear more of the next few months is what she's doing with their finances in the coming years. And in all likelihood, they're going to continue going up.
Yeah, that's certainly the impression I had as well tomorrow, because I did sit down with Bridget Phillipson just before coming on air as well. We can have a listen now to that interview. Thank you very much for being on the programme this evening. It's great to have you here. Just a few months ago, so many young people voted Labour at the election. Why didn't you tell them that you were going to put up tuition fees?
So I thought it was necessary to take the difficult decision today that I've announced in Parliament to increase fees. The reason was, on becoming Secretary of State for Education, I've been able to review everything in terms of the state of the sector. And I'm concerned about making sure that students have got universities to go to. And that's why it is necessary to put in place this extra investment into our universities. But this is not the end. I'm clear that there does have to be reform that runs alongside it, especially where it comes to better outcomes for students, especially students from less well-off backgrounds who don't always have the chance to go to university, even where that's what they would want, but where we also see real challenges around students completing their courses, especially, again, those from more disadvantaged backgrounds. So this was a difficult decision that I had to take, but I think a necessary one in order to stabilise the university sector.
I understand the arguments that this was a difficult but necessary decision, but what I'm struggling to accept is that this was only apparent after the election. I mean, you said in your statement to the House that it's been clear for 7 years that university funding was unsustainable. You know, in May, a group of vice-chancellors, former Labour ministers like Alan Johnson, Peter Mandelson, Margaret Hodge, warned universities would go bust without higher fees. So it was pretty clear for a long time that something like this would have to happen. Why weren't you honest with people?
Look, it is a complex area in terms of the wider modelling. What I've set out today is both an increase in the maintenance loan in line with inflation for students that will be up to £414 a year for less well-off students.
I'm talking
alongside
about
that
why you weren't
inflationary fee
honest
increase.
with people before the election when this has been clear, by your own admission, for years.
I was clear that I want to reform the system where it comes to funding and also the sector overall. I'm absolutely determined to do that. But what was necessary today was to put in place that extra investment directly into our universities, because I'm concerned that without it,
it was necessary.
Students will find that
you
places and courses don't exist. That's the trade-off. And I have been absolutely clear, both in the statement and publicly, with the sector. I do expect more where it comes to widening participation and access. They have a responsibility to do more around efficiency, to drive down waste, to look at pay of their senior executives. There is a lot more that we will demand in return from the sector. But this was a necessary decision, a tough decision, but one, as you say, that the Conservative Party had ducked for many years.
But you ducked it as well. This is my point. You know, you weren't saying, you know, before the election, look, guys, this is a mess. We're going to have to put up fees. You didn't say that in the last manifesto. You didn't say it in the manifesto before. I mean, 5 years ago, Keir Starmer was talking about scrapping tuition fees completely. What a journey he's been on.
Well, a lot's happened in that time, and
No,
I think
it hasn't. That's the problem.
a lot has happened in that time. I mean, the state of the public finances, for one. So that does mean we've got some difficult choices. And I would also say that the decision that I've taken around universities today is an important decision in and of itself, but I think does have to be seen across the wider education system. So, for example, you know, the life chances of lots of children are determined by the age of 5. That's why I've made it my #1 priority
I want to talk to you about nurseries.
around early years and childcare, because, you know, if we are to break that link between background and success, then we've got to do a lot more when our children are young. I also want to make sure that universities are doing a lot more to support students from less well-off backgrounds to have the chance to go to university. I'd also say alongside that a lot more where it comes to providing opportunities for adults to upskill, to retrain, doing more with further education colleges too. There's some great practice, but there's also some practice that I think really needs change.
I want to talk about what you describe as your #1 priority, early years, in a moment. But just first on tuition fees, will you continue to uprate tuition fees alongside inflation throughout Parliament?
We're going to look at this and maintenance support and the sector overall as part of the reform that we intend to set out in the months to come. So no decision has been taken on what happens beyond this.
Is it not best just to be level with people, to be honest, that, look, this is going to have to keep going up every year? That would give the sector some certainty.
Look, what I was clear about both during the election campaign and since is that, of course, because there hasn't been an increase in the fee over 7 years, it means that real terms value has declined considerably in that time. This is an important first step to reform of the sector. But I do want to look right across the board at what is required, not just to get our universities on a more sustainable footing, to make sure that they can be those engines of growth and opportunity that I know they can be, but also to deliver a better deal for students as a part of that too.
If you're uprating tuition fees with inflation, will you also uprate the threshold at which you need to start paying it back with inflation?
Again, that's something that we intend to look at as part of that wider reform.
But you can't say that that's going to happen?
We're not making that change now.
OK, then just finally on universities, you know, you're talking about increasing maintenance loans for students from less well-off backgrounds. The point is, though, you know, these are loans rather than grants. And if you look at research by the Sutton Trust, you know, the founder of the Sutton Trust, for example, he would say that, you know, the poorest students are the most debt averse, so this increasingly deters them from going to university. Isn't the only thing you're doing is leaving more working class students who don't have the bank of mum and dad, more debt when they finish university?
University, the chance to be educated is a good thing in and of itself, but it is a long-term investment, both in your career opportunities and longer-term prospects, and that's as true for working class students as it is for anybody else. What I would say is I hear that. nothing's off the table, but I do have to be upfront about the really big challenge that we face where it comes to the public finances. There are lots of areas right across our education where I would like to do more, to do it better, to do it faster. But, you know, we are where we are in terms of the public finances. That does put constraints upon us. But in terms of fairness for students, in making sure that access to university and also completion of university courses, which is increasingly a challenge for working class students, the sector needs to do more on that too. We as government today have set out what we will do to support the sector. In return, we will be demanding a programme of reform that they will work with us to deliver.
It sounds to me like you've been pushing for grants rather than loans. Is that true?
I want to look across the board at the support that is required, absolutely.
It's not a denial.
Well, I think you look at the system and you do recognise the challenges that are there for working class students, of course, but I'm not going to make promises I can't deliver. And I'm acutely aware of the pressures across education. And as we were just discussing there, around early years too, looking at where you can deliver really big, tangible changes to life chances. And as Education Secretary, I do have to balance sometimes competing pressures. That's the reality of where we are now.
I want to talk to you about early years, if I may, because you've spoken an awful lot about the need to improve early years. You just said that it's your number one priority, that kids' life chances are determined by the time they're 5. So I guess in my head I'm just trying to kind of marry that up with the impact of the budget on nurseries. Because, as you know, nurseries employ an awful lot of workers on low wages. The rise in employers' national insurance disproportionately hitting businesses like nurseries, already many of them struggling to keep afloat. This is Juna Sullivan, who's the founder of the Leaf Social Enterprise Nursery. She says it's a huge burden for us. Is the government trying to kill the early years sector?
So, of course, we will look at the impact on the sector. We're doing that work right now. Of course, many smaller providers will find...
You've done that before the budget.
Well, many smaller providers will find that with the changes to the employment allowance, they're not paying any national insurance at all. What I would say, in addition, is that at the final phase of the planned rollout in next September, we're talking about £8 billion a year going into the sector. But I'm not complacent about that. And at that point, the government will be paying for 80% of childcare, 80% government-backed childcare in this country. I don't think we're doing enough to work to support the sector around staffing, around pay and conditions, and much more besides. And as part of the early years strategy that we'll be setting out going into next year, working with the sector, I'm determined to deliver longer-term reform because, as with our universities, investment and reform have to go hand in hand. But I say to the sector, genuinely and sincerely, I want to work with them to overcome these longer-term challenges that we face. This is additional investment that they have seen through the budget, but I know that there is more that we need to do to make sure we've got the staff and we've got the really high-quality provision that does deliver brilliant life chances for children. I
guess this is, the issue, though, isn't it? You have been saying for years that, the free hours that nurseries have got have been underfunded by, the previous government. Now we've got nursery bosses saying, hang on a minute, our staffing costs are going up, the minimum wage is going up. Obviously, they want to pay their work as well, but it's an additional cost for business. They will have probably been so thankful that someone like you, talking about early years, has been in this job, and yet it must feel like a bit of a betrayal if they're worried about how to make ends meet. Did you lobby on their behalf for the budget? Did you not get what you wanted?
Well, in a really difficult fiscal environment, we've protected education priorities. That includes a commitment to up to £8 billion next year when the rollout runs through. That is a big investment, a really big investment. But I understand their frustration, of course I do, about the wider challenges that they see. And, we do need to reform the system and we need to look, I haven't just been talking about the level of funding. I've also been talking for a long time about the complexity, the difficulties that parents face in accessing it, but also the problems that we see around places in the country. It's why we also in the budget put in place an additional £15 million to secure more primary-based nurseries to make sure we're creating provision in areas where at the moment parents find the places just aren't there.
OK, thank you very much indeed. I'm meant to be there with the Education Secretary. Right, let's bring in our duo for this evening, shall we? We're joined by the former Defence Secretary, Liam Fox, and the former Shadow Chancellor, John McDonnell. Great to have you both on the panel this evening. John, I'm interested in your view. Was Labour right to increase tuition fees?
Let me be clear. I opposed tuition fees from the beginning. I voted against them because I thought this would inevitably happen. They'd be ratcheted up. They were introduced at £3,000, then the Conservatives got in tripled them to 9,000. Then last year, which I thought was iniquitous, to be honest, they reduced the threshold and then extended the period to 40 years from 30 years, almost a 50% increase. And that burden is falling on young people. And it does deter people, particularly poorer working class kids. So I think tuition fees are a mistake. I think we've got the other issue as well, quite a large, the size of not being paid. The government has to write off billions virtually every year of the amount that isn't paid because the system isn't working. So my view is we need towards a debate now about getting rid of tuition fees and look at alternative funding. And the alternative funding has to come from taxation. My view, and one of my big concerns in the budget was, for example, I'll give you an example about taxation. Carried interest. Carried interest is a sort of euphemism for profiteering by venture capitalists. They lobbied very, very hard, and they were expecting a rise to the same equivalent of income, 45% for higher earners. And what they got, they lobbied and lobbied and lobbied, and they got 32%. And again, so the wealthiest are not paying their way. Some of those who've made massive profits not paying their way. And they should be. And if we had a fair taxation system, we wouldn't need tuition fees.
Liam, what's your view on this? Because, look, you hear from Labour, they say that, you know, the university sector has been effectively starved of money and it has to happen.
I think there are two separate debates here. The first is, what do we do with higher education? Do we have too many students at university? Do we have too many universities? This is a whole debate that needs to be had, and it will be had, I'm quite sure, in this Parliament. I think the second debate is a different one, which is about reputation and about reputation for honesty in particular. Keir Starmer was elected as the leader of the Labour Party, campaigning in his campaign then to abolish tuition fees entirely. Bridget Phillipson wrote an article last year in the Times saying, under Labour, you will pay less students than you pay now. Now they're going to pay more. You get that on top of the fact that Labour said we will not raise taxes by more than £8.5 billion before the general election, raise them by 40 afterwards. Now, you can argue the merits and demerits of all of these things, but when a government develops a reputation, when the electorate start to believe that they will say one thing and then do another, then it can be quite difficult for a government to recover from that. And we've seen in the polls already that the public have developed quite a clear view on this, to the extent where only 4 months into office, Labour have fallen into second place in the opinion polls. It can be very difficult for governments to get beyond that if that's what the public believe, that they would say anything to get elected and then do something different afterwards.
If I was a young person listening to that, I think, where do I come in all of this? And what they're interested in is not the political knockabout. They want to know whether or not they can afford to go to university. And under tuition fees, many of them are deterred as a result. So we need more radical reform.
When Keir Starmer was running to be leader of the Labour Party, though, he said he was going to scrap tuition fees. Do you think that was dishonest?
I think it was a mistake not adhering to it. I think he should have adhered to it. And
do you think he really believed it at the time, or do you think he was just trying to win over members?
I can't look into another person's soul, to be honest. But I think it's important now that we recognise we've got an ongoing problem. This issue of tuition fees is not going away. You know, government writing off billions of pounds because the system isn't working. Young people, some deterred from going to university because of the increasing cost that there is. And I'm glad they've increased the maintenance loans, but they should be maintenance grants. And we need to get back to a system where education, I've always looked upon education as a gift from one generation to another, not a commodity to be bought and sold in the way it is at the moment, because that impacts upon the ethos of universities as well. We now have vice-chancellors on hundreds of thousands of pounds salaries running universities as though they were corporations rather than education institutions. I think it's affected the whole of the system itself.
I think that John actually puts his finger on something there that I think is very important, which is, why do we have education? What is the point of education? For me, it's that we maximise the benefits and the potential of our society by maximising the potential of each individual within it. And that requires us, I think, to have a wider debate about our education, including, are we giving the appropriate types of education to people? And in particular, I think that we have undervalued vocational education for too long in this country and overvalued, relatively, academic education. And I think we do need to have a proper debate about whether the educational system is serving our wider society well, or is it actually trying to force young people into a type of education that's not necessarily the most appropriate for them as individuals.
And early years as well, right? You know,
Exactly,
do you think that nurseries, do you think the government needs to look again at how nurseries in particular are going to be impacted by some of the changes in the budget?
I think that's inevitable. I think that debate is going to happen. And I think you got a hint of that from when you interviewed Bridget, to be honest. They'll come back on that one. And again, it's just making sure that we're investing the appropriate amount, but we're doing it in a way that acts as a supportive mechanism rather than, for some entering into providing the nursery provision, you can be deterred because that hill to climb to make ends meet is so difficult in this particular area. But that does mean that you've got to put, I'm afraid it is state resources through a fair taxation system.
We've already got record taxes, though, some might be saying.
Well, we've got record taxes as a result of the failure to have a fair taxation system over a number of years. And I actually do believe Keir was right in that the heaviest burden should go on the broadest shoulders. And I think in this budget, we haven't fulfilled that promise enough.
And I think that it's a good job that the government have got a big majority in the House of Commons. I think they're going to find quite a lot of challenge from the Labour side. There are going to be wider debates than just early years. How do you improve the quality of nursery education if you're making the jobs more expensive for the employers? And the same thing will happen in the care sector. The same thing will happen in general practice. I think that the Chancellor is going to find that she has quite a lot of opposition from her own side on this, never mind from the official
put
opposition.
that in context, though, Lee, and that's as a result. What the government is saying is quite right. It's 14 years of austerity we've had. So our public services have been run down as a lack of investment, and because, I'm afraid, the last government hasn't effectively redistributed wealth on income through a fair taxation system. That's why we're in this mess we are.
Well, because people talk about austerity, remember, we had it to rebalance the public finances when we inherited the biggest budget deficit ever.
From the last
Labour government.
It is a familiar debate.
I don't think you're going to
We're not going to agree on this one tonight.
Thanks both very much indeed. Coming up on the Politics Hub. The new Conservative leader, Kemi Badenoch, has started to assemble her shadow cabinet team. We're going to bring you the latest.
Are you ready to make your voices heard?
As America votes,
Win, 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 win.
Get ready for an election night like no other.
join our team stateside
as we get close to the action
and bring you the results as they arrive.
With full reaction and comprehensive analysis guiding you through the night.
In an election which could have huge consequences around the world.
America Votes, Election Night, live.
Get the full story first on Sky News.
First Minister, how are you?
Good morning. Good morning.
Nice to see you. How are you feeling?
Looking forward to getting into the parliamentary chamber.
Are you any further forward to making a decision?
No, it's an important day today.
All of the claims were in line with my parliamentary duties, so I'm making that clear to you, Conor.
He was a Scot through and through.
He was a very good politician.
Alex Salmond was controversial, he was a disruptor, but above all, he was respected.
Will you resign if you lose this week?
Again, I'm not planning to, of course, lose the vote of no confidence. I'm planning to win that vote of no confidence.
His face said it all.
My intention to stand down as party leader.
This is now a storm with deadly consequences. How are they feeling?
They're a bit scared at the minute.
They've been told to evacuate. How are you feeling?
Devastated.
Hundreds of homes were wiped out by flooding. I'm Conor Gillis, Sky's Scotland correspondent.
It was probably the darkest time in my life.
Scott is 5 years sober after a cocaine addiction left him close to death. Scotland has a shameful record, worse than England, the worst in Europe.
Why not just say you've failed? Because then you might get more respect from families who've lost loved ones.
This is where one of the UK's most prolific rapists thought he'd got away with murder.
Sky News can reveal that former sex workers had told police he was sexually violent.
My Emma.
Free wherever you get your news. It's over, isn't it? The Americans say he is Rossi, a fraudster. This has been one of the most bizarre cases ever heard in a courtroom in this country. A dangerous murderer.
Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive Andrew Ennis after this?
She said she can forgive him, but as long as he's behind bars.
By doing the right thing, it's destroyed your life.
They terrorised me. They intimidated me.
Sky News. The full story first.
we've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Hello, welcome back. You're watching The Politics Hub. Well, before the break, we were hearing from the Education Secretary about the government's decision to increase university tuition fees. And this time last week on this programme, Kemi Badenoch was telling me she wanted all 6 candidates in the Conservative leadership contest to end up with jobs. Now she's won, it looks like she's trying to make that happen. We're joined now by our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates. We are starting to get the first signs of who's in the shadow cabinet. It's, I guess, the first big decision from Kemi Badenoch since she became leader of the opposition.
That's right. We're learning quite a lot about her today. This morning she went into Conservative headquarters and said they can turn it round in one term, in one parliament. So it's a tall order. The question is, can the new top team help her do that? And there are big appointments. So probably no bigger choice for Kemi Badenoch is the Shadow Chancellor. And that hasn't gone to a fellow right-winger, as we thought might happen, but instead to Mel Stride. Now, he's a veteran cabinet minister. He was the Work and Pensions Secretary. He is a former chairman of the Treasury Select Committee, so he knows the sort of details of all of this. So the question is, what question does appointing Mel Stride answer? And I think the answer to that, Sophie, is that having Mel Stride means that Kemi Badenoch is showing that she doesn't just want fellow travellers from her wing of the party, but is prepared to listen to people who perhaps think a bit differently, draw on a bigger set of opinions than just her own. Last week, Mel Stride led a protest to reverse the winter fuel allowance cuts by Labour. It's not the kind of position that you'd expect Kemi Badenoch to take, but nevertheless, now he will be the one advising her principally on economics. Now we've got Priti Patel. She has been made the Shadow Foreign Secretary, an individual that will be well known to many, many of our viewers. She is a prominent figure on the right of the party. She was the first to be ejected from the leadership contest. She's somebody who's had to resign from cabinet posts before, so she's not uncontroversial. There were also accusations of bullying, which she denied when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister. So what is the question that Kemi Badenoch hopes that she can answer? Well, I think it's about bringing some cover from parts of the right of the Tory party, because although Kemi Badenoch is kind of more or less thought to be from the right, she is a bit unpopular amongst some bits, as we were hearing on Saturday. John Hayes seemed to be suggesting that the right, bits of the right, might only throw their weight behind her for the time being. So Priti Patel, a big figure from that wing who can perhaps calm some nerves. I think Kemi Badenoch also wants to show that she wants to look to the future. That's why she's appointed Laura Trott, the third person on our screen. She is going to be the Shadow Secretary of State for Education. She's a long-time advisor to David Cameron and to others, became an MP in 2019 and now is in the Shadow Cabinet. And she was appointed alongside Neil O'Brien, who's going to be under her Minister of State for Education, so one rung down. He was one of Robert Jenrick's key campaign managers. So she's showing there that she can reach across the aisle to even the people that supported her opponent.
No Robert Jenrick there, noticing, Sam?
Funny that. Now, we think that Robert Jenrick will get the job of Shadow Justice Secretary.
I mean, that's what Team Jenrick have told me has happened. So this is very confusing. Just bear with us all. It's very confusing.
So allies of Robert Jenrick say that Robert Jenrick has been handed the position of Shadow Justice Secretary, which is one of Shadow Cabinet's mid-level jobs. It's not Shadow Home, which, you know, maybe given his focus on immigration, he might have had his eye on. Important to say that Team Badenoch have not confirmed this. The rest of the Shadow Cabinet is going to come in the morning, so it might be an anxious wait once again for Robert Jenrick 3 days after he didn't quite become Tory party leader.
I am reminded of the time that I interviewed Kemi Badenoch this time last week, actually, and she said that she was going to offer everyone who ran against her, including Robert Jenrick, a post in any Shadow Cabinet if she won, but they may not agree with the thing that she wanted them to do. It just pops into my mind. Sam, thank you very much indeed. Sam Coates there, our Deputy Political Editor. Coming up next on the Politics Hub. We'll get the reaction of our panel to those appointments, and we'll also talk to them about the perils of assembling a front bench in opposition. Hello, welcome back. You're watching The Politics Hub. Well, we were just hearing before the break about the Conservative shadow cabinet reshuffle, or shuffle, I should say. It's not really a reshuffle. Let's get the thoughts of Liam and John on that. Liam, what do you make of the appointments that we've heard so far?
Margaret Thatcher used to say that we avoid external coalitions in Britain by maintaining internal coalitions in Britain. And Margaret Thatcher kept people in her shadow cabinet and her cabinet who she quite profoundly disagreed with, but she recognised they were still legitimate voices within the wider Conservative family. And I think that's what we're seeing from Kemi. I think she does understand that, and however you view the election we've just had, Keir Starmer maintained his internal coalition better than we maintained ours. We fragmented and we paid a huge price for that. I think she does recognise that. I do slightly take a difference with something you said earlier, Sophie, about the Americanization of politics and Kemi moving towards principle rather than policy. If you look at Margaret Thatcher's 1979 manifesto, there was precious little detail in that manifesto, but lots of direction. So there's plenty precedent for that. And the other thing I would say about her, which I think is extraordinarily encouraging, is that of all the people who followed me as Trade Secretary, she was the one who would pick up the phone and say, what advice would you give me? What do you think I should do? Now, we've both been in politics a long time. There aren't that many politicians who will do that. And I think that's an extraordinarily encouraging sign that someone does that. That is not just about maintaining your coalition, that's about being able to listen to experience. Neither Robert Jenrick, of course, nor Kemi had been in opposition, and opposition is a very different game from government itself. And the willingness, again, to listen, I think that's hugely encouraging.
That's really interesting. I mean, John, you've got a bit of, I guess, muscle memory about appointing shadow cabinets when not everyone wants to serve, perhaps, in that shadow cabinet.
She's got a slightly different problem. I don't want to be cruel, but she's got fewer to choose from. She's got only a small team within the Commons anyway. And she's obviously trying to do the broad church approach to a certain extent. But it's holding that together is going to be difficult. Holding the party together within the Commons is going to be difficult anyway. I think the choice she's done, I think that reflects broad church, but it reflects her difficulties as well. Chancellor from the sort of centre-left, but he does as he's told in any job he's done, so she knows he'll do as he's told at the end of the day. Priti Patel as Foreign Secretary, well, she was sacked for operating as Foreign Secretary, even though she wasn't at that point in time.
I think she's a great choice. I think she's a great choice.
But I think she's indisciplined. I think she's can go rogue at any time. So I think she'll have difficulty managing her. And then others are not particularly well known or tried and tested. But I think the fact that she's trying to hold together a broad church is going to prove very, very difficult because she herself has such fixed views as well. And we'll see. We'll see, but my experience of trying to put together a shadow cabinet when you've got large numbers of people who are not willing to serve, it's tough. It's even tougher holding it together, and you'll find that out in the first 18 months or so.
That's interesting. And the other issue, of course, she has is what to do with Robert Jenrick. And I was looking at this, actually, and precedent shows that if you do bring in your rival into the tent and give them a big job, then the Conservatives have tended to go on to win the election. When you don't do that, you've tended to lose. I'm thinking about like David Cameron giving a big job to David Davis, for example, or if you look more recently, Liz Truss, Rishi Sunak didn't serve, and that kind of ended in sort of defeat. How important is that, and how problematic is it for Kemi Badenoch?
If Jenrick doesn't get Home Secretary, I think he'll be bitterly disappointed. And if it's justice, he will see that as a demotion, definitely.
Well, I think he will serve because he said it's about a team effort, and there are a number of things that drive the opposition and how easy it is to hold them together. One, of course, is how popular the government is, and there's a sort of a mirror effect of that. If the government's very unpopular, it's easier to hold your opposition, I think, together. And I think that it's a relatively small number. That can work both ways. It can actually work to improve discipline because they see themselves as a much more threatened political group, and they will want to ensure that if in 4 years' time, 5 years' time, that we have a government that's not popular, that they are the clear alternative. So there are quite strong incentives, and the Conservative Party is driven very largely by its desire to be in power.
You have to get used to opposition, though, right? Maybe, for now anyway, for the next few years.
Some may be looking beyond Kemi Badenoch already.
Do you think?
Well, that's what happens when you're in this sort of situation, when you've imploded at an election and people think you might not have the opportunity of coming back soon enough.
OK, thanks, both.
We shall see.
Sure, we'll see. Still to come on the Politics Hub. How does tomorrow's US election compare to other pivotal elections? We'll get the views of our panel. We'll also revisit some of our own US election memories. Stay with us.
Are you ready to make your voices heard?
As America votes,
win, 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 win.
Get ready for an election night like no other.
join our team stateside
as we get close to the action
and bring you the results as they arrive.
With full reaction and comprehensive analysis guiding you through the night.
In an election which could have huge consequences around the world.
America Votes, Election Night, live.
Get the full story first on Sky News.
Prime Minister Modi is the most popular politician in the country. He is expected to win his third term in these elections.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional.
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party, a promise fulfilled I'm Neville Lazarus, and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
He paid over $50,000 to traffickers to get him to America. Instead, he was kidnapped, tied up, and threatened by smugglers. A commando from the state force walks me through to a Mai Tai village on the front line.
Firing to civilians and they're burning our house.
We cross to the opposite side, held by the cookies.
When they fire, we have to retaliate.
Sky News get the full story first. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration.
The enthusiasm is palpable. The young desire change.
These elections are a pivotal moment for the country's economic and political history. The concern here is that the public healthcare system is inadequate.
In a prayer, she's asking God to help understand what happened. I cannot carry on. God, help me. He says his world has crashed. Like him, there are scores of families searching for their loved ones.
Too often have families endured such tragedies for the negligence not only by the administration, but also by spiritual people in this country. Free wherever you get your news. Even though it has few seats in Parliament, Kashmir is symbolic and very significant. It's often been called a nuclear flashpoint.
Hello, welcome back to the Politics Hub. Well, the US election is now just hours away in the view of many. It could be one of the most significant in recent history, with two vastly different visions of both American and global politics on offer. It is a big election. It really is, what the world is kind of anticipating, what they're waiting for. And we can now chat to a panel about how this contest compares with those past, find out a few of their personal memories, perhaps, of previous presidential races as well. Right, let's bring in Liam and John, shall we? John, how do you think this race compares then?
For me, this is the most worrying one of all. I am absolutely petrified of Trump getting elected, both in terms of what it does within the United States itself, the division it will cause, but also implications for the rest of the world. Economically, I'm really worried. If he does fulfil what he's promised if elected, which is tariffs, I think that'll have a knock-on effect right in our own economy and right the way across the globe. So I'm really worried. I think he could sow real division. I'm worried about what would happen with Ukraine, for example, as well, if he follows through what he's been suggesting so far, which is basically withdrawing support from Ukrainians themselves. So I think, I'm really worried. Whereas at other elections, I've been excited, but not as worried as of the risk that there is now.
Should we be worried?
Well, I think there's one thing that we've not really discussed in all this debate around the American election, and that's what's happening in Congress. And it's very clear, I think, that if you can predict any one thing about this election, it's that the Republicans are going to win the Senate. And I think that matters enormously in terms of the dynamics of American politics. If Donald Trump wins, he'll be a one-term president. He can only serve one more term. By the midterms, the Republicans will be looking at his successor. And so in the dynamics of American politics, the Senate under Republican control will be enormously influential, as they would be in blocking what they would see as Kamala Harris's excessively liberal policies. Whoever's. Yeah. And so I think that it matters more in this election what happens in the Senate and the House, perhaps, than we give it credit for. Our debate in Britain is always entirely about the White House, without understanding the wider dynamics, I think, of American politics. So I think the one thing you can be sure of is that we're going to have a Republican Senate, and that Republican Senate is going to have a huge amount of influence. That the House could go either way, actually. It's really very finely balanced, as could the presidency. But I think it has enormous consequences for the shape of American politics, and I think the point John was making about how much a president will be free to do what they want.
Are there any, the kind of, you always think, don't you, of the big American elections past? It's something that's quite, ingrained in our consciousness if you're kind of politicalised like we are. Is there any sort of memories that stand out to you, John?
I go back a long way, but actually the one that really cut through for me was the election of Obama. It really was. And it was a sensational, and it was emotional at the time, having, in America in particular, having a black man elected as president, but also having someone who was so eloquent and so in my view, very principled as well. So that was a huge breakthrough, I think.
How about you, Liam?
Well, I think we tend to look at these elections and think they're sort of superhuman candidates. And I remember when George W. Bush was elected, and I had known him from when he was governor of Texas. And I remember a friend of mine phoning up and saying, George is going to be the president of the United States. and me thinking, gosh, somebody from my background knows somebody who's going to be the president of the United States.
Is it one of those things where you realise that like all the professional athletes are younger than you? You're like, oh my goodness. Like...
It makes you realise that, you know, whatever your differences politically, they're human beings. And I think it's a tremendous feeling when you can see that the barriers are being broken and that people that you know can rise to the highest office in the world. And I think, you know, for all our cynicism about politics and for all the money that's thrown at an American election, which I think is, you know, most people think is obscene, it's still about people in the end.
I'm going to be really annoying now. Who's going to win?
I think Harris will, and I'm working on the basis, something you mentioned, I think the women's vote might do it this time.
What do you reckon?
I think it is literally impossible to call it because it's not just about the swing states. It's now about individual counties and even sub-counties in those swing states. And for a country, you know, with hundreds of millions of a population going to vote tomorrow, it will probably be down to less than 100,000 people to decide who wins the presidency.
Come on, Liam, plump yourself. Come on. What's your best estimate?
If you'd asked me 2 weeks ago, I would have said Harris. If you'd asked me a week ago, I would have said Trump.
So today?
And today, I just don't know. I literally cannot call it.
It's extraordinary when you think, though, isn't it, that, you know, the fate of not just America, but the world could come down to...
Absolutely cannot call this one.
Point Liam made ages ago in one of the conversations I had, we won't know for weeks by the looks of it as well.
It's very true. Thanks both.
Don't stay up late tomorrow night.
Do stay up late tomorrow with us on Sky News. I'll see you later.